Good morning. Thanks for the opportunity, Chairman Cerna, members of the board. I appreciate the opportunity not only to present here today, but I also appreciate the workshop that you afforded us an opportunity to go into a little bit more depth about our transition to intelligence-led policing, which will be a recurring theme throughout my presentation today. But certainly that workshop gave me an opportunity to go far more into the weeds than I would have been able to in this short amount of time. So I appreciate that. Supervisor Kennedy, I'm mindful of your question. I think it's probably it'll be more contextual if I answer it at the end of the presentation, if that's all right with you. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank our county executive, Brad Hudson, and his team, Nav and Britt. It is a different budget year, as he pointed out. It is nice to be talking solely about growth money and being made whole in terms of our status quo. Allows us to focus on some of the initiatives that have been brought forward as well as our own interests. So I appreciate that. I have about 14 slides. Most of my information that I'll present will be in the narrative surrounding these slides. Some of it will be familiar to you, some of it will not. Our first slide is just to provide context of where we were, as I mentioned, in the good old days of 2008 versus where we were in calendar year 2014. As you can see, the number of field officers, which this slide represents, is nowhere near. In fact, it's about 79 short, or 22.8% under what we were in 2008. It's important to note that the role of policing really has two distinct components, and I say they're distinct, although they're related, and neither one is more or less important than the other. They're distinct because they don't overlap, they don't affect each other, and that is our 911 response on the one hand, and our ability to provide services that affect quality of life for all the residents of our county. They're distinct because our ability to provide timely 911 response has nothing to do with quality of life, except for the folks that were responding to their 911 calls, clearly. But our quality of life issues have nothing to do with 911 response. So what we have tried to do since that time, as we've been able to realize internal efficiencies, is try and develop a balance between providing optimum level of quality life, as well as to provide our optimum ability to provide timely response to 911 calls. We have done a good job. I think most people's perception of the Sheriff's Department and their administration of public safety products is positive. But I can tell you that we are now plateaued in each. We have done an amazing job, not myself, but the amazing men and women that work for me, in looking internally and being introspective, utilizing technology better, looking critically at our deployment models and times, utilizing and collaborating with our faith-based and community-based partners to an extent that we never have before, to try and get to some of these optimum levels to achieve this balance. As you can notice, in the 2008 model, we had very large POP, HIP is High Impact Patrol, and our transient enforcement detail. We had very large teams to be able to attack those quality of life issues. So that's where we are today. But let's take a look at what has actually happened over the last several years. Despite folks' perception, and as I mentioned, the two components of our policing mandate is 911 response and quality of life. This reflects our 911 response times that have increased steadily since 2011. We are only able to capture data from 2011 because we went to a different CAD system in that time, but I would suspect that if we were able to go back further and capture that data, it would show an increasing time from our days of 2008 and then in 2009 when we suffered our layoffs. So every single category of 911 response time, and those are in minutes, you can see has steadily increased since 2011. Priority 1 calls have increased over 12.5%. Priority 2 calls over 20%, Priority 3 calls over 26%, and so on since 2011. It's an important point to make and for you to understand that status quo has resulted in this. So status quo does not mean things stay the same. There is no reason to believe that this trajectory of increased 911 response times will not continue unless we do something else. Bless you. So what are priority 1, 2, 3, and 4 calls? Here's a sampling, and I know we lumped them all together during our workshop, but we've broken them out so you can see exactly what priority 1, 2, 3, and 4 calls are. The priority 1, obviously life-threatening, critical life or death emergencies in most instances. Those are the ones that have increased 13%. Priority 2 calls, for example, a kidnapping that had just occurred now has a 17-minute response time. If you can try and imagine someone being legitimately kidnapped, what a 17-minute on average response time could do to trying to have a successful outcome. Even priority 3 calls, which we might tend to think aren't as important, that have gone up over 22% in our ability to respond to them in a timely fashion. A recent robbery where there's no medical required, a recent home invasion, not just reports that have happened historically, those are priority 4s, but one that had just occurred where there's no medical need, someone that just got their home invaded now has an average response time increased over 22 minutes. And as I mentioned, and worth repeating, that this trajectory will continue unless we in the Sheriff's Department do something differently. The second component of our mandate is quality of life. And I've listed a number of them up there that I think we can all agree affect the quality of life of most of us in the county. I say often that most of us in the county have never had to call 911 for a life-threatening critical emergency, fortunately, but every single one of us in the county are affected by these quality of life issues. Graffiti, prostitution, homelessness, vandalism. I don't think there's anyone among us that could say that those things haven't gotten worse and not better, although we don't have the data, the hard data like the response time for 911 calls to suggest it. I think just intuitively we know homelessness has gotten worse, for example. Some of our projects that we're actively engaged in, such as the Avenues project, are in danger certainly of sliding backwards on this trajectory or us becoming ineffective at all in some of these projects. Additionally, we have the Promise Zone that this county has put a lot of effort into. As mentioned earlier, to reach the Promise Zone goals, it requires collaboration between a number of different agencies. SHRA, Community Development Department, certainly our Sheriff's Department, and many others. Many of those goals require creation of safe neighborhoods and reducing the fear of crime, and we're losing our ability to do that, and will continue to do so. Again, unless we do something different, we'll have a more difficult time delivering on that promise. So our solution has been something we've worked very, very hard on, a number of very smart, intelligent, and dedicated people in our Sheriff's Department over a long period of time, coming up to an intelligence-led policing model. We did not invent it. We are not the pioneers. In fact, we're somewhat behind the curve in transitioning to this next era of policing. I know you've gotten a lot of information from our workshop. You've gotten a lot of information from the county executive about what intelligence-led policing is. It's a very large concept and multifaceted, so I will try and break it down into bite-sized chunks for consumption. Number one is geographic accountability. Having the same deputies, the same sergeants assigned geographically to the same areas every single day, not traversing very large, uncentralized districts to answer calls for service. It also has supervisor and manager accountability. As I'll demonstrate a little bit later in one of the slides, we have the realization right now that we have our deputies working for a number of different supervisors and managers during the course of their work week. They don't have accountability upwards. The supervisors don't have ownership over any individual deputy that works for several supervisors over the span of their work week. It also means ownership of short and long-term projects. As we identify these quality of life projects, they become the responsibility of the patrol officers and the sergeants and the lieutenants in a designated way to handle those projects going forward. It has intelligence and data-driven policing and crime reduction efforts. The idea is twofold: to use real-time data to understand where the crime is occurring, who is committing it, where the problem properties and premises and businesses are, that we can attack them surgically rather than generally, And we can prevent crime because we know where the crime is being committed, we know when it is being committed, we know what crimes are happening, and we can be there to try and prevent that crime from happening. And lastly, for these bite-sized chunks of what the oversimplification of an intelligence-led policing is community relations. Having better relationships with each and every one of our community, because as the discussion goes, and I'll talk briefly about procedural justice in a little bit, the communities care at least as much on how we get there, how we get to an end result, as the end result itself. We know, and you should know now, that the status quo will not work going forward for public safety in Sacramento County. We must adapt in the Sheriff's Department, and through this hard work and effort and a lot of research and studying, and very much a work in progress, that pathway for us is intelligence-led policing. There are a number of benefits of intelligence-led policing. I won't read them all to you, other than to say that it kind of, another way of saying some of the things that I already mentioned, but in effect, and the bottom line is, what it does is makes each and every one of our patrol officers a POP officer. The idea is to increase the level of their free time from 10 to 15% what it is now to 45% free time, because that's what the studies show for an effective intelligence-led policing model. So combine that with a team concept where they're working with the same people and for the same people each and every day, working in the same finite geographic area, and having 45% free time to engage in proactive policing as well as engage in the community, both the business community and the residential community, to work on long-term projects and get to know the communities, and importantly, the communities getting to know who is responsible for their communities. It's not just a deputy owning a community, it's a community also owning a deputy. This is a snapshot of what a patrol model looks like any given day currently. You have a patrol sergeant who supervises 6 patrol officers. Those patrol officers, first of all, the sergeant may change each day. The 6 deputies certainly change each day, and those 6 deputies are responsible for providing public safety services to a very large geographic area. And I just took a snapshot, but you can extrapolate it to every community that we serve. In this example, Central Division, just under 117,000 residents, the communities of South Oak Park, Fruit Ridge, Florin, Parkway, and Vineyard. As you can easily see, a very large geographic area. A lot of their time is taken up inefficiently going from call to call across many geographic areas and communities. The end result is they have no ownership, no interest, no attachment to any of these particular communities as they respond to their duties. Intelligence-led policing and the team concept changes that. This is what it looks like under the team concept, and I use that interchangeably with intelligence-led policing, but the team concept is a foundational requirement to going to intelligence-led policing. You have the same patrol lieutenant over a large geographic area. You have the same patrol sergeant over the same officers, the same teams every day. And now you have, for example, Vineyard with patrol officers G and H. You have the same 2 deputies every single day that they work dealing with the Vineyard community. They know the community knows them. I'm sure that each and every one of you in your community meetings are impressed to the verge of perhaps being amazed that when someone brings up an issue about a particular house, our POP officers already know it. And they say, oh yeah, that's the house with the red car out front. Or oh yeah, that's the Joneses that live there. They already know about that. Well, we have a very small contingent of POP officers who can only do so many things. But again, this model creates that kind of ownership and intimacy with the community for the deputies that serve it, for all of our deputies. And the accountability going upward. Right now, a patrol officer during the course of his work week or her work week may have to be supervised by 2 or 3 different sergeants because of our split shifts and our many different days off. That causes problems. It doesn't lend itself to sergeant owning the deputy or his long-term performance or success, and it doesn't lend itself to forcing the deputies to be accountable to a single supervisor. And I'd ask you, where else in county leadership or any other world does this occur? In most instances, we try hard to make a single conduit, a single chain of command for people, so there is clear delineation of ownership and responsibility, both upwards and downwards. Now, law enforcement's a little bit unique because we span 24 hours a day and we don't have any lapses. But this is a model. This team concept policing is an effort to try and go towards what the rest of the world recognizes is the most efficient model of supervision and management. And quite frankly, if you look at any spectacular failure of law enforcement in California or nationwide, they all start with some things in common. And one of those commonalities is lack of adequate management oversight. And this will be solved. Eliminating that potential will be served by this team concept and move towards intelligent-led policing. This is what it looks like. You have a lieutenant over several team sergeants, the same team sergeants, and the same patrol officers reporting to the same team sergeants. It's a linear hierarchy that will be more accountable, not only going downwards towards the community, but going upwards. And incidentally, I will have the same real-time crime data and information that is available to my lieutenants, my sergeants, my officers, and my commanders. So I will know exactly who to go to for what community if I have a problem. And I will expect them, the expectation will be that they already have a plan, that they've already identified the same thing I have, and that they have a plan to solve it through their supervision and through their management. This allows our teams to work together, train together, and be accountable to each other in ways that they are not now, thereby increasing the efficiency even with no additional staffing. This team model also allows for an overlap day, which will provide an abundance of officers for either a fluidly deployable resource to handle issues or to attack some of these short-term and long-term projects that will be identified that are now not being addressed except by piecemeal. And as I mentioned, I think it's important to talk a little bit about procedural justice. There obviously is a national conversation going on about procedural justice and implicit bias. And really, I'm not talking about the media's conversation, the politicians' conversation. Those are a little bit ludicrous. But the conversation that is going on substantively with law enforcement leaders all across the state. I currently sit on the Attorney General's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. I am the chair of the Procedural Justice Committee. And there's a lot of good work being done on this. And as a matter of fact, I believe that this will be a conversation that goes on. This will be the direction of policing over the next 5 years, much like community-oriented policing was in the early 2000s. It is a natural integration to intelligence-led policing to have our communities foster better trust and better relationship with their sheriff's department and vice versa. It is a natural segue and will help us in our efforts towards procedural justice. We, in law enforcement in general, and the sheriff's department in particular, must move away from our normal enforcement efforts, which is saturation of neighborhoods, casting wide nets, result-driven actions and policies. We must move towards procedural and process-driven results and policies. And instead of casting these wide nets and doing saturation patrols, we have now the intelligence and data capabilities to be able to identify the 6% of the people that are responsible for 60% of the crime and go after them, go after singular locations, either problem businesses or problem residences, rather than saturating an area, thereby increasing the trust and the accountability to the communities that we serve. So here's what it will take. But before I get into the specifics about those numbers, I wanted to make a couple of points. Number one, this is the 5th budget presentation I've done before this board. I have never asked for personnel growth other than to maintain our status quo. We have instead looked introspectively. We have come to this board with our deficiencies to maintain status quo, but with a plan of how we could accommodate a certain percentage of that and the portion that we felt we couldn't cover. And the board has always been responsive to that. I hope that during this 5th iteration, you understand and appreciate the fact that I have never asked for one more dollar for the Sheriff's Department than I have needed. Secondly, in last year's budget presentation, the preliminary budget presentation about this time last year, you might recall that we gave $500,000 back because we came in over budget. And my statement to this board was, we will continue to work with the county executive, but I'm not asking for anything in preliminary budget. Make the public defender and probation whole for public safety, that I will come back next year, which is now this year, with growth needs. I did make this board aware that we would have significant growth needs, but that I could put them off for 1 year, trying to be responsible last year as we still struggled to get to this year. Number 3, I want to make clear that this does not represent all of our growth needs. We have a number of growth needs, but we internally, like we have done every year, have triaged the importance of what we're asking for. This represents the minimum that we need to advance towards intelligence-led policing. But make no mistake about it, we have a multi-year plan where we intend to ask for growth for the next several years. So putting off our resources for intelligence-led policing till next year will compound the requests that we're going to have next year. For example, we have property detectives right now that carry a caseload of hundreds of cases of theft. It's reasonable to assume that those cases are not going to be investigated, and justice will be denied not only for those crime victims, but for the suspects who continue to commit these crimes. And lastly, I want to assure you that I have narrowly and minimally tailored this request as to what we need to get towards intelligence-led policing. I did not ask for the 79 officers, field officers that we are short to get us back to where we were in 2008. In fact, this model asked for 26 deputy sheriffs and a host of other positions, including, as you see, supervision and management to get us to that team policing concept, as well as community resource officers who will go out and take cold reports in place of our deputies, helping us get to that 45% free time without simply throwing more deputies at the problem. Because this is narrowly tailored, I'm in the odd position of really stating that these numbers represent an all or nothing proposition. I would never come before this board in any normal year and say that we want everything or nothing at all, because any resources, generally speaking, are better than no resources. But in this instance, this is a complete paradigm shift of how we conduct policing in Sacramento County. And we started with a much higher number and went back and through blood, sweat, and tears got it down to this as reflective of the minimum that we need to go to community-oriented policing, to intelligence-led policing, rather. As a matter of fact, our Deputy Sheriff's Association has expressed great concern already about going to a team policing concept as a precursor to ILP without adequate staffing to do so. And I can tell you that they are not wrong. So in conclusion, and before I open it up for any questions you might have, I want to make a couple of points. One, that I understand I'm asking for a lot of money. I understand that. But in the context of our operating budget, I'm asking for about a 2% growth in our overall operating budget. I also understand that there are other worthwhile initiatives before this board. And to tell you the truth, I can't find a fault with any one of them. They're all worthwhile initiatives. But I will say that for any of those initiatives to work, they have to start with the fundamentals, just like education. It has to start with the fundamentals. And the fundamentals is people feeling safe and actually being safe, our ability to respond to people that need our help, and our ability to respond to quality of life issues, to maintain property values, quality of life, to maintain the business climate. Everything is tied in to public safety. I know one of the initiatives before you is the reduction of African American child death. Very worthwhile endeavor. We've been part of this. We've been partnering with this. We're part of the steering committee. We certainly had involvement in the strategic plan. In that study, it identified 4 categories in 4 neighborhoods that touch the county. It identified 147 African American child deaths from the period of study from 1990 to 2009, a period of 20 years. It's 147 too many by anyone's standard. That averages 7.7 a year. To provide context, from 2012 to 2014, a much shorter period of time, 481 African American boys and young men were the victim of gun violence. 59 of them were killed. From 2013 to 2014, the rate in which African American boys and young men were killed doubled. I have no reason to believe that the trajectory will not continue. I can do something about that. Again, everything is fundamental. Healthcare only becomes important if people feel safe, if people don't become continued victims of crime, or if the community has confidence in their law enforcement agency to be able to call them when they're the victim without fear that their status might cause them to be deported. They need that confidence. I can do that. The fundamentals: public safety, crime reduction, community relations, neighborhood accountability, all of these can be achieved. We really can do amazing things with this transition. And I hope, as a priority it is to us in our department, that it becomes a priority to you as well. So before I take questions, I'll address yours, Supervisor Kennedy. The reason that we built our budget with a zero growth or an actual loss in that revenue is that was information gleaned from ICE themselves. A couple of things happened with them. Number one, their in-custody ICE arrests are down over 95% at their last report because no one honors ICE detainers anymore. The other reason is they opened up a facility south of us in California. So they anticipated and told us, gave us forewarning, that we likely would not have any, that the contract would go down to zero. I talked to the agent in charge out of San Francisco just this week about that. And while he still thinks that may happen, clearly we have a population fulfilling this contract in our jails now. And so that is one way that the cost for this can be mitigated, because I know Brad's recommendation was he funded us for all the deficiencies that we anticipated. We clearly have ongoing revenue, and we can certainly offset by the amount of revenue received. Now, the issue for the board, of course, is we don't know the long-term sustainability of that. And what I'm asking for, obviously, is continued funding, which is different than what funding we may get over the next year for this particular contract. We don't know, and we certainly don't know 2 or 3 years out would do, but we certainly would be willing to offset the commitment by that amount that we're able to achieve, and we would certainly work hard to try and achieve a high level of income from that to the extent that we can. The second thing is we realize if we go back and look at the positions that we're asking for, we can fill most of these in relatively short order. There's currently a Resource Officer 2 list that we can draw from. We have some that we can move over immediately, and all of the rest we can fill immediately with the exception of deputy sheriffs. The 26 deputy sheriffs and certainly the 13 additional that would be created by the promotion of the lieutenants and sergeants for a total of 39 would take us some amount of time to get, perhaps as long as 6 months or mid-year. So while the $9.8 million is what we're asking for and what we would need, some of those numbers could be mitigated. I think more importantly what I'm looking for today is not $9.8 million, but a commitment to be able to acquire those positions so we can not have to forestall our transition to intelligence-led policing, and then to the commitment to fund them if and as they become available, should they come up. Does that answer your question, sir?
Yes, well, kind of, as much as you can, because it's speculative at this point. But do you think, again, I'm asking for more speculation, but do you think that there will be a clarification on whether or not we get any of that ICE funding between now and September?
I think so, and again, I can only go on what the information that we get from ICE, but I think so. They like our facility. We're a large county. We're a large jail. We can handle medically and psychologically fragile inmates. Our proximity to the federal courthouse right next door, they like our facility. So I do suspect that if they're going to be holding folks in local detention facilities, that ours will be one of the last that are that are emptied. The other thing is I know that they are undergoing some lawsuits right now, so they're trying to come up with some measures to mitigate the effects of the lawsuit, to try and get through the lawsuit, and they're very engaged with our personnel and our population out of the branch jail, because we're going to have to do some things differently to accommodate this potential lawsuit. So I can only assume, but it is an assumption, that they wouldn't be putting forth that effort if they believed that we would have nobody. So I do think, I am hopeful, and I do think there will be some population ongoing at least through this fiscal year, and I'm unaware of any plans to exponentially increase their capacity going forward. So I'm hopeful that we will have some measure. I just don't know what that might be. And we would likely have better information by September. I'm not sure we'd have final information by September.
Thank you.
Okay. I know Supervisor Natoli wishes to speak, but I wanted to first thank you, Sheriff, not just for the presentation today, but I thought the workshop that we had on public safety a few weeks back was, again, very worthwhile and enlightening. I don't know that you would find any objection from any of us about your intent to pursue this model shift. And I think you've impressed upon, at least you've impressed upon me, the fact that this is part and parcel of advancing some of the other priorities that you mentioned in your presentation. I completely get that. I guess the fundamental question I have for you is the county executive's initial budget recommendation was about a little shy of $2 million, 1.8 million.
1.7.
1.7. So
I'd take 1.8 though if you're offering. Is that is that a firm offer?
I think it was rounding. You've been consistent about the price tag to fully fund and implement the model shift at 9.8. Now we have in front of us, as you saw from the county executive's presentation, the prospect of a $3 million augmentation that would get you closer to 4.8. I need to know from you, based on what you said about all or nothing, what that does in terms of getting us to that change, and is it worthwhile? If it's not the full, if you don't get the full funding that you're looking for, is it worth an honest response that we'll get there from here?
So I'll point out again that status quo is not really status quo. It's further slipping of what we're able to do both on the 911 side and the quality of life side. So your question being that if we can't get there is, at what point, what does that mean? And it's a little bit delicate, but I'll be very direct with you, is we are going to intelligence-led policing because we have to maintain my mandate, my oath of office. This is something that we need to transition to as a department. I think everybody can appreciate that. So the question becomes, if it's the 1.7 plus 3 million, so let's say the board adopts the 4.7 million and keeps it at that, the question for me then becomes, okay, well, I'm going to get there. That's the conclusion. Now let's back it up and see how we get there with 4.7 million. And we will get there with 4.7 million. It will not be as graceful and as painless as if we got there with 9.8 million, to be sure. But the main, like I said before, the foundational aspect of going to intelligence-led policing is going to this team model, this rezoning and redistricting, to get the workload, the personnel, commensurate with the workload in each of these zones. And to do that, I need an influx of folks in patrol. And so the likelihood of what will happen is the folks that are not signed to straight patrol, we will have to start scouring our department and looking for personnel that we can inject into this model to get us artificially to those numbers. So we will get to the patrol numbers, we'll get to that intelligence-led model, but we will not get perhaps some of the things such as our entire complement of community service officers to be able to take the reports. We will sacrifice certainly the kind of nice to have many of the quality of life things that we have now, with the hope and intention that some of that will be mitigated by our ability to provide those services on the back end. But for the interim, the likelihood is those officers have to come from somewhere, and they will come from they'll come from places that are more painful.
Fair enough.
I mean, I know historically that the departments come up here and I mean, way back in our history, the departments come up here and said, you know, Mexico City, blood in the streets. First thing we're getting rid of is the POP team, and I've been very, very careful over the last 5 years not to posture in that fashion or in any fashion. Just tried to be an honest broker about it. And so maybe I'm being a little bit too delicate, because the likelihood of some of our POP programs and some of those other nice-to-have transient enforcement details being casualties of this as we transition, in the growing pains of us transitioning without our full ability to do so, there is a likelihood of that. Yeah, I don't want anyone to be surprised.
Can you stand there and tell us that if it's 4.7 this year, that you would continue to impress upon us at the right time in the coming fiscal year the fact that, as you pointed out today, you have growth requests, or you have likely growth requests in the future? Plus, would there be a pursuit of additional funding next year as we approach the budget next June, to fulfill the complement of staffing and other resources to fully implement the model shift?
Well, I mean, I can tell you that I would never turn down funding, but I can also tell you that if we try and go to this transition towards intelligence-led policing without the full complement of folks to be able to do it, number one, it's doomed to failure. And number two, I have no buy-in from my department, because their role has not changed. In other words, part of the success of this, so if I have 4 zones in a district, just to simplify it, and let's say I have 2 officers in each zone commensurate with the workload. If the workload heightens in one zone, the traditional response is you have other folks migrating from the other zones to be able to accommodate their B partner. Well, this model requires a contingent of deployable, flexible force to be able to say, okay, well, I've got people that can go in this area. I want you to stay there for your 45% free time. If any of the components of this intelligence-led policing are not met, then it will not be successful. It will just be another patrol model, and we will still be trying to catch up to what we're doing. We'll be responsive and not proactive. So I don't know how else to answer you. If I got half this month, or half this year, and half next year, it would put off true intelligence-led policing for 1 year. And in that process, in that interim, that we would continue to slide on both fronts. We would still make progress towards it, but it would not be the model that I envision.
But we would get there eventually, assuming it was the will of the board to continue to work with you and get you the resources that you're seeking.
If you're willing to let the county decline over the next year.
Well, and that's why I asked the question, because it feels odd to me that we would even consider a budget augmentation for your department that is almost twice what the initial county executive's recommendation was, and then to hear a statement like that, quite frankly. I mean,
statement like?
That we're destined for continued failure if we don't.
Well, I think the data supports that. During my presentation, I mentioned that status quo over the last several years is not just that. I mean, the inclination is to believe that if we're funded, and we are, to status quo, thanks to Brad and all their hard work, we're funded to status quo. I think the inclination is to believe, okay, well, you know, this is a nice to have. We all agree with it, but you know, if we can't get there till next year, at least we're status quo. Well, hopefully what I've demonstrated during my presentation is status quo is not really status quo. It doesn't keep us where we are. It continues us on a trajectory of getting worse 911 response times and poorer quality of life issues. So I'm not trying to employ scare tactics, but the data doesn't lie. I mean, the quality of life issues are more anecdotal. I think it's what we sense. I think we all sense that homelessness has become an issue. I think we all sense that some of these issues are worse, but we have no data to suggest it. The 911 response times, I can show you that the trajectory is towards a larger response time. So I'm not trying to scare anybody. What I am saying is status quo is not status quo. Status quo is a decline in service.
All right, Supervisor Tully, then Supervisor Peters.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Sheriff Jones, for presentation, and certainly for answer some of the questions that I was going to ask about. But I think to the comment about all or nothing is that nothing's not an option. I get it. And so you're going to do all, irrespective of how we fund this, because you see the need, have demonstrated the stats, and so what the all means, though, is that then other deficiencies will occur as you move to the intelligence-led policing, and that in doing that over the course of the next year. I guess what I wanted to ask about those, Scott, was that in the 47 positions, and I think you accurately portrayed that, in that 39 of those would either be new hires or promotions, and so you're going to have to backfill behind those. And I guess the question, again, having sat here long enough, and you certainly with 5 years on that side of the dais, you carry some vacancy factor all the time, just by the normal attrition, the hiring process, and so forth. What is the number of sworn officers that you currently have, positions that have been authorized and funded that are vacant right now?
That was my, yeah, 30,
about 30. And so you have academies going on now
yeah, we usually have a nighttime and a daytime academy going on continuously.
Okay. So realistically, and again, I think you spoke to it in responding to Supervisor Kennedy, was that the 6 months to a year to implement.
Well, I said 6 months, but
yeah, or maybe a year. I think I heard that maybe a year. But anyway, so whatever it takes. Again, it takes time. I mean, just the hiring process, the background checks that you do, very thorough, promotional processes, and all that. And so what I'm trying to get to here, though, is that. Again, recognizing that you've narrowed, tailored your request, and certainly appreciate your willingness in the last few years as we've struggled to come out of the malaise that we were in, or worse, related to budgetary factors, but tried to certainly keep ahead of some of the issues that are confronting us in this community. Is that with the $4.7 million that's now being recommended, that's my calculation is just a little less than half of what your request is. That one way, I guess, to address this, where you get the commitment, and it's probably something for us to weigh out, and I know that when I briefed with the undersheriff that we talked briefly about this, is that I think you want to know that the full commitment is there, and because even with funded positions, you still have a vacancy factor that, again, is part of normal operations, is that if we were to authorize the positions but only fund that portion, at least for the adoption of the budget here or the approval of the budget in June, and then come back in September, would allow you obviously to move in that direction, to know that those positions were authorized. However, the funding would be certainly require, in addition to whatever we were able to fund, if we weren't doing the full amount, would certainly require us taking another future action, either based upon new information in September, and or as you move throughout the rest of the year. I guess we do come back from time to time, mid-year budget, and looking at that and so forth, but that I think would allow you then to move forward with the acknowledgement that we've intended to support this wholly, if that's what we do, and authorize the position. So I guess I'd like to get your take on that. Again, that's not your preference. I know what your request is. It's been very clear, and you've been very clear at the podium there. But
and I appreciate that. And just for a point of clarification, the all or nothing is more for the commitment side than the funding side, because clearly there's going to be mitigating factors both in contract revenues and certainly our ability to hire. And you point out exactly correctly that it will take us some time to get 39 deputy sheriffs. So my worry, staggering this over several years, is my biggest concern is a fit and start of trying to go halfway to an intelligence-led policing model, not knowing or not having the security or comfort of a commitment from the board that I'm going to be able to get across the finish line next year or perhaps the year after. And so the all or nothing part, frankly, is just for a commitment from this board. And one of the potential results that you pointed out, I think, is a good one, and that is if this board were to approve the $4.7 million as recommended by the county executive, but further commit that they would accept my budget proposal with a commitment to fund them as they became available. That would certainly give me the confidence to be able to go forward and hire folks as I'm able to do so. We're not trying to get rich off this. We're not trying to make money, but I just need that security to know that when and if the time comes that we're able to hire 5 and then 10 and then maybe 20 out of the next academy, that I'll have the support from the board, and I think we can reasonably assume the county will continue on the trajectory it will financially, and so getting that commitment is along with the revenue, so we can start that now with the bodies that we can hire, I think would be that all or nothing commitment that I was looking for the board.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks, Scott. A couple other questions just as it relates to the full package here, which I appreciated the asterisk that it included 24 vehicles. I know last year, last 2 years, we had this conversation about the new platform and the vehicles. Have you completely changed out the platforms, or was that I thought it was a couple-year approach, and you're going to need more vehicles. But again, you're not going to need all those tomorrow or next month, or even, again, you've got a fairly sizable fleet, and then again, you have attrition in that fleet.
That's correct.
So I guess because those are pretty heavy costs. I don't know what 24 vehicles run.
But when you allocate the body, obviously it's going to be a loaded price, which includes the vehicle for the
fully
field
funded
officers.
yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that, obviously, that would be over a normal cycle as well.
And one of the things, and again, this is probably more for county executive staff, I don't know, Brad or Nav or whoever, but we've, in the budget this year, because again, apparently the fixed asset fund is now depleted, that we used to at least finance in part some of the the fleet acquisitions and so forth, and do that internally and allow for a payback, so we didn't have the full chunk in any given year. And we have some departments that are more vehicle intensive than others, and obviously the Sheriff's Department, they're mobile, and so they need to have those. And so I guess I'm curious as to whether there's any ability, if we were to embark on this, certainly working with the Sheriff and recognizing that obviously those fleet needs will be there if, for the positions that are authorized and funded, that would be a part of the package, but whether there's a way to offset some of that, at least for a year, in the sense that, if we're trying to get here, this is a big bite. There's no question about it. It's an important aspect of what we do for public safety. But so maybe if you don't have an answer right now, maybe we can get, report back to us on Wednesday when we can bring this back for our final deliberations. I think it would be helpful to know, if we have these big fleet acquisitions, particularly for newly authorized, we've got a couple other areas, but they usually are on the order of magnitude or 2 or 3 or 4. They're not 2 dozen. So, and that might help again with some of at least the number. You're still going to spend the money in the long run, but it might help us to offset some of that, at least for a present time. One other question I have, Sheriff, is that, as I heard in the presentation discussion about the effectiveness of our POP teams, and again, I know over time they've ebbed and flowed with certainly your ability and that of your predecessors to have sufficient funds to do all the other things that are required, whether it's in the in the institutions and or detective division and in other areas. So with this, then it does, because annually that is interjected into the conversation. So with intelligent-led policing, if we're going to go to this particular format and it's going to be complemented by the POP team, is that a conversation then that, I don't say once and for all time, but at least solidifies that next year when we have a conversation about what the what the growth requests are, that we're not, we've got to do this, but the POP officers, that team's, and so I guess that to me is really key, and it's key because if it's a part of the component of not only have your community officers and those POP teams that will do that more intensified enforcement and be a part of that overall fabric that you're going to deploy and employ out there with our personnel, that to me would be key. And again, it doesn't mean you can't have the conversation, and we
Right.
might very well, but I want to get your sense about that, Scott.
Yeah, so traditionally, right, we have this, certainly pre-2008, we had large POP teams to handle these issues around the county. As we've gone forward after our layoffs, we have had to, in most instances, there's been a couple of POP officers funded here and there, but mostly we've had to cleave those forces from field. Just like everything that we've had to, we lost, as you know, everything that was non-field, non-investigation, non-corrections. So things like our academy that we had to reopen, those bodies came from field services. Our helicopter that we put back up in the air, those bodies had to come from field services. Our SWAT team that used to be standalone are now integrated in field services. So when they get a call out, obviously it has a huge impact. So the idea of the intelligence of policing is to inject a POP mindset to each of the field officers. So they're doing that POP function. Additionally, with that overlap day, they're actually handling those POP issues. And then as an aside, and I alluded to it earlier, there's a kind of a mobile, sort of rapidly deployable field force. We won't call them POP, but they'll probably be inclusive of perhaps our SWAT team and some other folks, maybe some of our former POP guys, but so we can address issues, both short-term, in different areas as they come up, because we'll have real-time data. We know what's happening right now instead of several months ago. and then the longer-term project as well. So the whole department's going to kind of be a pop team. So
Okay,
it
so
won't
it'll be
talked about-
integrated. You won't really have this distinct designation any longer. So it'll be integrated. So that's part of this request, is that integration will be whole or nearly whole as it relates to day-to-day policing 24/7 then.
Yes, that's correct. As I tell people, I want them to have a warrior skill set and a guardian mindset.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Peters.
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation today, Sheriff. You, I'm sure, remember our conversations over the last 5 years, and that my feeling that the unincorporated area, Sac County Metro, if you will, is this essentially, well, it's larger than the city of Sacramento. It's larger than any city in our county, and it doesn't have a municipal police force. And as far as I can tell, this works in that model. You call it intelligent policing, and I think it's more like the model where we have cities have, where they attack certain areas of crime. And I'm all for this, and I think our chair told you that all 5 of us are very interested in this model. I don't know how we tell you today that you're going to get the 9.8 million, but you're getting 4.7, and I think there's some confusion here on this all-in statement, and because I think we are in. I don't know how we can give you $9 million today, but if you're going to get 4.7, and just the hiring time, I think you've had a couple academies graduate recently, so you've got the people to put in the positions. By the time you get them hired, we'll be in next year's budget, and we know that's something that the additional money that you're going to be working on, through managing your own budget, that you might be able to come up with some of the money, and that we've got a goal that the next year that we are able to, if the economy continues to slowly expand here, that we would be able to do this. So I just think we ought to be really clear on what the all-in really means in the timing, I guess.
So I appreciate that everyone, I mean, I don't speak for everyone, but I assume that you're all supportive of the notion. I think you've made comments to that effect. My concern is I'm the one that has to pull the trigger on this, and I have to accept the consequences of its failure or success. And so,
well,
the all-in is...
So do we, to a certain extent.
Correct, ultimately. But my concern, and maybe concern's not the right word, but my wanting and kind of an all-in commitment is that we could certainly go forward with the 4.7 million and go towards this, take active steps towards this. If I know there's a conducive atmosphere with all of you, that at some point, or several points probably as we go along in the next budget year from October on, that I'll be coming back and saying, okay, well, we've got the ability to hire 12 of our 36 and asking for that augmentation. If I know there's a willingness and a commitment that you're all kind of on board with this, I'm scared to do it because I'm a bit left-brained, a bit anal. I'm afraid to leave that to the chance in so much as it is, because I know you have varying priorities. Obviously, I have a small sliver. You have the whole pizza. But I mean, if that's what I have to do, that's what I have to do. And I do take some comfort into your statements that you would be at least receptive to those adjustments as we go forward.
Does that mean that, I just want to make sure I understood what you just said, that you might come back mid-year and ask, there is the possibility of you needing more personnel deployment, so you'd ask us between budgets for us to formally consider augmenting your budget outside of our annual budget discussions?
That's, yes. Within the context of what I'm asking for. In other words, 39 officers, when I'm able to get 12, or when I'm able to get 20, as I get closer to being able to fill those positions, to come back at that time and ask for the funding for that, rather than right now trying to get $9.8 million during this budget process.
That would be on top of what I think you're hearing up here, is that there's some interest on the $3 million augmentation on top of the 4.7.
So that's the 47 position idea. That
right.
If you get 4.7 in this budget cycle, but you get enough positions as if there were it was a $9.5 million augmentation that you would come back when you got the certain positions.
So if we got the positions
when you got them filled, the 4.7.
But you could go.
Okay, so when we got the positions filled, but not, we'd get the positions approved but not funded?
Yes.
Right, but you get the 4.7 million to the points being made here that up to, and then if you get to the point mid-year, you're moving right along with it, and then you're going to be back to us saying, I got 12 more folks I need to have funded to take that beyond the 4.7 you authorized in the budget, if that's the number that sticks, because you authorized 47 positions, and so whatever 4.7 million buys, I get 100 positions, you figure that out, but if you come in for more, then, and I guess we would know that consciously that, whether it was, mid-year or before or third quarter, that, that, to me, that would be, again, a conscious decision by this board, certainly working with you, Sheriff, and with our county executive, that if that's what we're going to do.
I think that'd be fine, and that certainly reflects us accurately being able to fill the bodies and your commitment to fund them when they become available. The nervous part for me is obviously I don't know, and you all don't know what commitments financially or otherwise might come up between now and then, and if we're into February and March, I would hate the inclination to be, well, let's just wait, let's just wrap it up into this year's budget cycle, and all of a sudden we're kind of at a standstill or part way across the bridge. And again, maybe I'm overstating that. I certainly don't mean that in a disrespectful way to counter what it is you're telling me. I just know that your interests are varied and wide, and my concern is not getting to the finish line and being halfway there and being faced with the prospect of perhaps having to go back or go forward inadequately, and that's the only thing I'm trying to avoid. So it sounds like maybe we're trying to get to the same place and saying the same thing. Perhaps the problem is me not having the security to
That's why you get paid the big bucks, Sheriff.
maybe my years of law enforcement has made me a bit cynical.
Well, maybe between now and Wednesday, again, working with the exec's office, could craft something to this board. Again, obviously, with conversations that we had here today, to get to a point where, again, you have your comfort level sufficient to recognize a commitment that this board, assuming we take that step, could then give you the ability to go forward as you're going to anyway, because you're going to do this anyway. And so you just need to know from the standpoint of your department that you're not going to deficit a whole lot of other things in your department and going forward and doing this. So
yeah, hearing this and assuming that all five of you, although I haven't heard from you, feel the same way, certainly 4.7 million would get us enough to get started and go quite a ways down the track, with the additional confidence that if and when the time comes we're able to fill those positions, that we'll be able to come back and have a more substantive discussion about those positions. Appreciate that.
Okay. Supervisor McGlash.
Thank you. Well, I also support this initiative, and I do have 2 cities in my district, I still have a sizable unincorporated area as well that's urbanized or suburbanized. And I think that this model fits in well with the other initiatives and growth initiatives that are before the board. I think there are just a lot of unknowns right now to this week as we go to adopt this preliminary budget, that we will have more information when we come back at final budget. So I think that there is room in here to achieve what you're trying to achieve, because when we have more information before us in September, then we can finalize a lot of these initiatives. But my understanding is your primary concern is that we include those positions, the 47 positions in your budget, while they might not all be funded this week. Is that?
That's correct.
Correct. But we want to fund you would want us to fund a sizable piece of that.
That's also correct.
Okay. Anything you want to add?
I don't think so. I mean, unless there are other questions, I think.
I had one other, assuming Supervisor McGlashan is done with her
Yes.
comments. One other question for you, and you may have covered it, Sheriff, during the workshop, but are there any particular specific grant opportunities as we begin to shift to this model that complements what we might otherwise commit to you in terms of a general fund commitment?
There are limited grant opportunities. For example, the COPS grant from the United States Department of Justice, which you're all familiar with, are available specifically for this type of policing. However, this year is the same as prior years, where each officer comes with a maximum contribution from the feds of $125,000. That's over the life of the 4-year grant. So in other words, it used to be they'd pay for the officers, well, actually they didn't pay for quite all of them, for 3 years with a commitment by the board to do the 4th year. Well, now they get $125,000 over the course of the 3 years with the county's, the board's commitment to pay for the entire 4th year as well as augment that. So I've never brought him before this board because it's not appropriate, and I just didn't think it was appropriate. So there's other grants available, but all of them seem to, at this point, I mean, we have small grants, onesies and twosies, that we are applying for, but some of the larger grants do require that large match.
Okay. Any further questions for the Sheriff? If not, we have members of the public that have signed up to speak. Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. First up is Christine Morse.
Thank you very much. My name is Christine Morse from the Ascend program. I'm one of the co-founders. And we had slides, but I don't think we need to go through them. I think I can just make a brief statement because a lot has changed. Just wanted to put on the record that Ascend over the last 5 years has brought a lot of new perspectives to this problem of recidivism. And as you know, you can't solve a problem with the same consciousness that created it. So I think bringing fresh perspective has been helpful. However, bringing a new perspective, of course, that suggests change. And that can sometimes instill a little bit of fear or trigger some resistance, but that's okay. We're working through that. Some of the things that are new that are resulting in good outcomes are, and we've talked about this before, is the data. We've opened up our doors, all of our students, everything we're doing, to a third-party institution to track and measure what it is that we do and then report nationally on the data. And we think that has been great because it's helped us improve. It showed us the things we're doing well, and it helps us to continue to make our program a better program in the future. Another thing that we've brought, another new perspective, is that there has to be many, many hours put into treatment outside of the classroom. Literally spending time with these offenders, helping them remove life barriers. One example is we have a man in our class now who is a veteran. He served 18 years in the military, and he could not get the VA to help him. And so I went with him personally, and I, explained his story. He was shot in the back in Desert Storm. He served all this time, and he can't even get any help. And I went versed in what the law is and explaining to them that they needed to help him, and now they have. He's getting medication for his PTSD, counseling for that, and also additional counseling for cognitive behavioral therapy. So that's just an example of sort of a new approach. It is more hours, it is intense, but it's working, and it is lowering recidivism. And so just a few updates. With the sheriff, we have a contract with the Sheriff's Department. Sheriff Scott Jones is an all-around good person. He's very intelligent and focused on doing the right thing.
He gives you a thumbs up.
What did that cost you, Sheriff Jones?
It's no secret that we've had some resistance from some line staff. The department is large, and as I mentioned, we're suggesting some changes, but we're working through it. Some of that resistance has resulted in few referrals, which has gotten us to this third year of our contract, but not even getting close to being able to fulfill it. However, we did have some conversations last week with the Sheriff's Department, and we should be having some more referrals next week. So we'll just keep you posted on that. And then I just wanted to say that I did speak with Chief Seal, and we really believe in him and believe in his integrity. He has told us that he can't make promises, but he will try to increase our funding by September, so we'll also have that update. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Christine. Okay, Lucille Van Omering.
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Lucille Van Omering. I'm a county resident, and I live in District 4. I'm here today to speak on behalf of the Sheriff Department's recommended budget proposal. While I am fortunate to live in a great neighborhood like other parts of the county, burglaries and vandalism continue to increase even in our community. I appreciate and support the county's careful oversight of taxpayers' dollars to ensure the wise and efficient use of our money. However, now that we are finally on the path to putting our fiscal house in order, it's time to take a closer look at one of the most important pieces of any county budget, law enforcement. I support the need to prioritize police responses between emergency and non-emergency situations, especially in high-crime areas. Nevertheless, burglaries, vandalism, and the indirect effects of vagrancy also take a toll on the well-being of the community at large, and our area of the county is no exception. Because of our proximity to the American River, we're frequently subjected to late-night weekend carousing by kids between 1 and 3 a.m. who are boozed up and aiming for a fight. Only 2 weeks ago, over 100 high school-aged kids converged on our street after 10 p.m. after the county parks warden found them starting campfires near the river and routed them out. The warden called the CHP, who then sent a helicopter and megaphoned the kids to disperse. Sadly, the kids stayed put and continued to party hardy. I believe the sheriff's office may have been called, but if they did arrive, it was well after the kids finally left the scene and their cars screeching and screaming down the street, and only after they had dumped a 5-gallon can of paint over a village monument, vandalism that cost the Homeowners Association $1,000 to clean up. The park trails were also strewn with empty beer cans and broken bottles. And this was no isolated incident. As the summer wears on, so do the loud early morning street parties and vandalism. A couple of days ago, someone started a grass fire on one of the trails behind a row of homes. Fortunately, someone saw it and the fire department was rapidly dispatched. Such things happen. Putting more deputies on the street will not stop all crime, but it will certainly deter it. I fully support putting deputies in areas that are targeted as high crime areas, but I also believe that even safer neighborhoods deserve an adequate law enforcement presence to maintain the peace and make us all more secure in our homes and communities. Therefore, I support the budget recommendations of the Sheriff's Office, most especially as it relates to additional Sheriff's Community Service officers as the first step in implementing a plan for an intelligent-led policing model. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Suzanne Shirley.
She regrets she had to go back to work.
Okay. George and Margaret Spatz.
Dear Chairman Cerna and members of the board, good morning.
Morning.
We are here before you today to urge you to approve the budget that has been requested by Sheriff Jones. Public safety should be the #1 priority of our county budget. As a longtime resident in the unincorporated area of New Foothill Farms, we have noticed an increase in crime that can be attributed to the Sheriff's Department's inability to properly staff POP as well as patrol units due to the severe budget cuts that they had to bear during the recent economic downturn and housing crash. With the economy and real estate values in full recovery, it is time for this Board of Supervisors to restore the budget of our Sheriff Department so we can once again have a better chance to be living in safer neighborhoods. We are not only here to speak for ourselves, We are also speaking for many of our neighbors who are unable to be here. We thank the board in advance for their consideration of this very important budget item. And the eyes of the voters are watching. Thank you.
And I did also want to say, sadly, the statistics that were provided by the sheriff were not news to me. We live those statistics. We are those statistics in the unincorporated area. And lastly, you have done miracles on a budget that you had. So.
Great, thank you. All right, our last speaker on the sheriff's budget is Kent Kearns.
Hi, Chairman Cerna and Board of Supervisors. My name is Kent Kearns. I've lived in New Foothill Farms for over 20 years. I've seen crime and homelessness go up. I've seen our sheriff's response go down. And the homeless problem is, I feel, a strong part of that problem. And without the Sheriff's Department having the funding to address it, it is getting worse. You look at any of the fields around New Foothill Farms, you can see the homeless encampments, and no one's doing a thing about it. And on top of that, those homeless people are robbing the county of revenue. They go through the county recycling cans, literally, and they know the schedule of every area, and they're just taking this stuff. And you guys are losing revenue that no one's doing anything about. And the people, a lot of the people that I see that are homeless in New Foothill Farms have decided to be homeless. They got drug and alcohol problems. They don't want to be responsible for their child's support payments or whatever. They're decisions they made on their own. And without the police, I mean, the Sheriff's Department being able to address these issues, everything's going to hell in a handbasket, and I'm being honest about it. My aunt and uncle, who live in New Foothill Farms for over 40 years, I've seen their neighborhood go to hell when it was, and most of the people that live there, where they live, have been long-term residents in that area. And my aunt knows most of her neighbors. So, I mean, it's ridiculous for, you know, people not to feel safe in their own neighborhood. So I strongly suggest that we fund the Sheriff's Department back to where it should have been, because the problems are getting worse. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kearns. Okay, I want to thank those members of the public that took time out of their schedules to be with us here in Chambers today and speak to this important matter. We take your comments very seriously, and it'll be part of our deliberations. So thanks to everyone that came to speak. Again, as a reminder, we are going to be breaking for lunch here shortly. But before we do that, I don't know if there's any further comment from board members about the sheriff's budget. We do have 2 members of the public that have signed up to speak on items not on the agenda. So I'd like to invite them to speak before we take the break. Before we do that, I'm going to invite Mr. Gildo to respond to, I think, a question or statement that Supervisor Natoli made.
Supervisor Natoli, the amount in the budget is $400,000 for the police service CFD for the upcoming fiscal year.
400,000.
400,000.
And what was it year over year?
It's about $25,000 growth. We're projecting $375,000 for this current fiscal year, projecting at $400,000 for next.
Okay, that's ongoing. That's revenue that won't go away.
Correct.
Okay, and so your projection is based upon building permits being issued or new development being?
Yes, some growth.
Okay, all right. Thanks for that.
Did you have another?
Yeah, just it's kind of procedural. So then, as we go through the budget units, Mr. Chair, and with the conversation we've had, so we'll come back as intended Wednesday then with any other questions that were outstanding, some of the suggestions, and then frame it that way then.
Right, and
okay.
we'll do that for all departments.
Correct. Okay, good. Thanks. Thanks.
Okay. Supervisor Peters.
Just a quick follow-up, Mr. Gill. I should have asked this at the time Don asked for that information, but if you could let me know, when we pass that, is it CSA?
It's a CFD.
CFD. at what level what did we do for areas that are already built out, where we're adding small, 6 and 8 lot subdivisions? Are those in that?
I need to research that.
We had some kind of number limit,
There is a
I think.
number.
I'd just be curious of the details of that.
Let us do the research and come back Wednesday with that.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Supervisor
5 or more?
McGlashan?
To partially answer that question, I recall that it's for projects that require a zone change, though, not just subdivisions. Maybe you can check on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, we're going to take our off-agenda items now. First up is Mr. Kearns.